How's it going, Tristan?
It's going all right. Going all right.
Cool. Yeah, well, I think before we start recording, you said that you're getting a bunch of rain, maybe at an unserendipitous time. So,
um, we're in the final stages of a multi-year home renovation, and the last thing that we have to do is get the gutters installed. And so this rainstorm came just a couple days too early for that.
mm, well, that sucks. Hopefully, get your gutters done soon. So, I know how that is. Actually, happened to me. We were doing a home renovation, and for some reason the house didn't have gutters. I don't know why they didn't have them installed, but
Huh.
that was pretty awesome. Yeah, we had a storm, and here we are. So, yeah, I can completely empathize. Well, hope that gets sorted
We could
out
spend the next
soon.
45 minutes talking about the trials and tribulations of home renovation, especially home renovation when you have two little kids and have to live in the house while it's going on. It's always a process.
Oh my god, how long have you lived there?
About 3 years, and
Okay.
it's been being worked on for basically that entire period.
I went through exactly the same thing. We have this duplex that we renovated, and it was about that long, and two kids, and we were living in
Huh.
the basement for a bit. Yeah, like living, like
Yep.
cooking on an air fryer.
Yep.
Just
Exactly.
so that's interesting. But you're running a company for amidst all this chaos, and so I actually am
Yep.
very curious how you do that. I was writing a book while I was renovating, and that was like the worst thing ever in running a company. But you're operating at a different level. I mean, actually, how does that
I
work?
don't, I don't know if there's an answer. I think that maybe I've tried to put boundaries around what time is work time and what time is home time. You know, if you're not careful, a job like this can be 100% of every waking hour of your day. Um, and I'm just honestly not in a position where I can allow that to happen. Whether that's
Right.
yeah, a million obligation it's outside of work. So I try to bookend it, and certainly I break those rules when there's like a lot going on at work, but I try to be pretty good about sticking to them.
Really interesting. It's one of those things where I think like right now, kids are out of school. I don't know how old your kids are, but it's one of the
3 and
challenges. That's
5. Yeah.
okay. Yeah, yeah. That's an age too where they're like the terrifying threes, and then the 5 year olds getting autonomy there too. So it's like,
I think it's
yeah,
fun. I think the
it's fun.
difference between 2 and 4 and 3 and 5 is worlds apart. I'm having a lot of fun with them right now.
That's super cool. Are you doing the renovations yourself, or are you?
No, no,
Are you?
no. Come on. I mean, like, if I were unemployed, then yeah, that would be a lot of fun, and I would love that. But it's hard enough just to manage the process and not do it myself.
Yeah, it is a process. That's interesting. Yeah, well, more power to you. I can empathize with your situation. It'll get better someday. You'll have a house, and then you'll get to
Thanks
have
for
it one
the
day.
for the words of optimism.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, cool. I don't think you need much of an introduction. I think we'll just jump right into it. I mean, DBT. I don't think needs much of an introduction either. But some of the things I've been curious about is, kind of we just talked about kind of balancing work life balance. In the midst of living in the a renovation project. But along those lines, I mean, how do you balance community versus a startup? I mean, I think that's maybe kind of a is it a similar tension, or how do you think about that?
That's a that's a really interesting framing. I've never drawn those parallels before. I do think that um, I do think that the core thing that I have to do in my job is balance competing tensions.
Mm,
And yes, like community versus commercial is one of them. I think that in an ideal world, um, the 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 community is benefited by our commercial success because hopefully, we are continuing to be good stewards of the community and of the actual open source code base, and that our success will only lead to more acceleration in terms of our ability to grow the community and to improve the actual code. There are certainly a million ways that can break down, and there's I think better and worse examples of how this has gone over the years. But ultimately that's only like one of the many kind of competing tensions that exist inside of any growth stage company. You have all of the classic, how do you get the different teams and leaders at the company to be aligned around a cohesive vision and make sure that everybody's working in the same direction, which is like, despite even in an environment like ours, where I think everyone truly has the best intentions and has great personal relationships, it is hard to keep a group of almost 400 people rowing in the same direction. So I frequently find that the thing that I'm spending most of my time on is trying to create and communicate shared vision, whether that's internally or externally. I don't know how good I am at that. I think that I think I certainly could and continuing to learn and continue to do better on that.
That's really interesting because I mean, based upon sort of the origins, right, where Fishtown was more of a consulting company to where you are now, I can imagine that you talk about those competing tensions. I can imagine personally, probably for you, that's been a big growth for you and learning.
Absolutely. Right? I did not set out with the goal to run a large company or to go public or to have some outsized monetary gain. I was curious about a new set of technologies that were becoming more used by a set of early adopters, the technologies that we've now come to know as the modern data stack. It has been a learning experience for me to kind of steward this process. But talking about tensions, that's one of the biggest that we have managed in our journey as a company, is become transitioning from being a consulting business to being a software business, and that was has probably been a multi-year journey, and I think we're finally coming through the other sides of that. But it is, I got an MBA, 10 plus years ago. And the thing that, there was a class that I think all MBAs are forced to take called something like organizational behavior. And, the thing that this professor said was, all of you care so much about your finance classes and your strategy classes. And these are like the things that MBA students are always the most interested in. But in a decade from now, you're going to come back to me and you're going to say, organizational behavior is everything. And I found myself thinking about that a lot. The hard parts are all about, taking people on a journey from where you're at today to where you need to go, because it impacts so many different people in so many different ways. When you make a change in direction, like we used to make our money from consulting and now we will make it from software.
This seems to be one of the big tensions too with consulting companies, because I mean, I ran a consulting company, you ran one, and there's always a tension where the cash flows, and the money's easier in consulting short term, right? I mean, that you get paid, and money's in your bank account, and that's great. You're also trading time for dollars, which totally sucks. And so every consultant I know is always trying to find like that next thing where they want to reach that escape velocity where they don't have to do consulting anymore. But it's so hard. It's so hard, as you know. I think you're probably one of the only people I've met that's actually managed to escape from that. But it's all. But I think you're absolutely right though, because I think a lot of the time consulting companies want to focus on quote the product that's going to get them to the next level, but they don't consider the organizational dynamics because these are diametrically opposed mandates almost, right?
Yeah.
I don't know how did you mentally and I guess culturally, like what were some of the things that you managed to identify and overcome during that transition?
I mean, that's a question that could fill an entire podcast episode by itself. But maybe I'll just start by saying that you you have to be upfront with the people on the team that there is a change in direction, and then you have to be open to the idea that not everyone's going to be excited about that change in direction. So it felt very exciting to me for us back in 2019 to make a transition from being a consulting business to a software business. But I think I was, and I had in my brain all of the things that come with having a software business. Like you said, consulting is a very hard business model. You are only as good as the last customer that you've closed, and it's just a very, very operationally challenging business to be in. Whereas if you can build a piece of IP that has recurring value over time, I think ultimately it's like a stronger strategic position to be in. But it's very hard to create that in the first place. But what I failed to anticipate was that there were several folks on our team, and we didn't have a big team. It was maybe 15 or 18 people at the time. But there were several folks on our team that they had joined to be a part of what was at the time probably the most innovative little data consulting business in the startup ecosystem. And that was the role in their career journeys that we were meant to play. And so we probably turned over about a third of the team in the year after that decision. And it was not, it was not out of some kind of deep dissatisfaction or, oh, you made the wrong decision. It was simply like, I came here for reason X, and now we are company Y and we can't supply reason X. And that's okay. And it's healthy. And I still have good relationships with those people, but I didn't anticipate it very effectively. That was a miss on my part.
It happens, but I mean, this is part of growing though, right? So,
Yes.
But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. But then you built the community, and there's competing tension again with the commercial aspect, right? I mean,
the community started right around the same time that the consulting business started. So the reason that we became a software company was that the DBT, which the first commit was in March of 2016, and then the DBT community, which was started a couple months after that, really took off. And so they continued to develop for about 3.5 years while we made our commercial business was consulting. And so by the time we even were a quote unquote software company, DBT already had about 1,000 companies using it in production, and then something like 4,000 people in the community, and both were growing at a rapid clip.
As CEO of DBT Labs, and what role do you still have in terms of driving the direction of the community and the company? Because I can imagine these are also competing tensions. This is probably the theme of the show, is competing tensions. But it's like, how do you balance the I mean, because I'm guessing you probably had a hand in the early genesis of the community. And did you have a vision for the community and what you wanted it to become, or did you kind of let it grow organically? And
a little both. and I'll get to your like more current day question in a second, but
Yeah.
I just I was a longtime data practitioner, and I was always working at software companies, and I was very aware of how software people solved problems when they didn't know the answer.
Mm.
Um, Either they turned to their compatriot next to them, and they did a pairing session or whatever, or they turned to online communities, whether that's Stack Overflow or a more specific targeted community, and they were able to pretty effectively get answers from these two different sources, um, and I felt like I had never had either of these sources. Like often there's just not that many data people at certainly data people who like know about a certain topic at a given company, and data communities back in 2015 were just say few and far between.
Right.
And so I wanted, just very selfishly, I wanted more of a community to kind of support me in doing the work that I was doing. And so the way that I showed up in the DBT community in the early days, and by the way, it was originally called Analyst Collective. That was, yeah, it was, I mean, the fact that you didn't know this is not at all surprising. That we changed the name a long time ago, but it's just like we had branding and everything for a community called Analyst Collective. And then it turned out that, everybody cohered around DBT.
Interesting.
But, yeah. So that was the problem that I was originally trying to solve. I don't know if you...
Wow. I didn't realize that. It's interesting. It's true, though, at that time, there was a dearth of communities in the data world. It was super fragmented. You had local user groups, maybe. But more, at least locally where I am in Salt Lake City, for example, I started, co-founded the Python meetup back in 2013 or something like that.
It's just exactly the kind of community that like people get their professional development from, and their like sense of meaning it's that kind of stuff is so valuable.
It's super valuable. But I noticed around 2014 or something like that, I started giving talks on machine learning. But because until then, Python was all about web development, and at least where we are, right? And then all of a sudden, all the talks were about data, because it's about the time data science was cool. Then deep learning came out. Then all of a sudden, everyone's deep into Python for data, and that's really where it took off. To the point where like no talks were about web or anything except data for the longest time, right? But it was really hard. There weren't like data, especially for analysts at that time. There weren't communities. I can tell you, because I was looking around, and the fact I didn't hear of Analyst Collective is not surprising at all, because it was incredibly balkanized. Like if you were in certain geographies, chance of you finding people was just probably not going to happen. So, but people rally around technologies. People rally, so I think to your point, that's probably where it got stronger.
I think you're right. And I don't exactly know why that's true. I'm not sure that it's necessarily a good thing. I mean, right. In software engineering, a lot of the communities cohere around languages, which is maybe more appropriate. But in data, they tend to cohere around like products, which is, I think, maybe a little bit less good. DBT is like a hybrid between a product and a language, but probably still the biggest and most successful community for data analysts is the Tableau community, which is great. And there's a lot of people who've benefited tremendously from the Tableau community. It's different having a community around something like Tableau versus something like Python.
Mm-hmm. One's more decentralized for sure than the other one's, kind of controlled. Yep. Then there were other groups too, like DAMA, Data Management Association. But again, that was kind of more, I would think of kind of a quasi entity, sort of controlling the narrative. They have their own book and stuff. So it's like, what else did you have? Like TDAN and TDW, organizations like that were, But again,
Yeah.
I think these are a lot more commercial type interests, right? There wasn't like a truly like, grassroots, data communities, especially back then. Nowadays, it seems like there's, Slack communities for any
Sure.
nuance that you
Yeah.
possibly want. So, but back in the
Yeah. I
day,
have
it
a one
wasn't
in,
the
one
case.
out policy on my Slack sidebar. It's like, if I'm going to join another Slack community, I'm going to leave one.
Interesting.
But okay. So you asked earlier, how do I help to drive community at this stage? And so a part of that is like figuring out our, things like our Slack content moderation rules, figuring out how the people that we have that work at DVT Labs spend their time as it relates to community. So those are kind of like standard and maybe not that interesting answers. But I think that the main way that I continue to play a role here is in naming problems and committing to what parts of the solutions we are going to help create in the world. So a couple of years ago, I went on record as saying that the fact that there was no modern data stack semantic layer was a problem. I talked a lot about this and the structural issues with it, and we have been working on that for the ensuing something like year and a half, and recently acquired a company called Transform that was a real technology leader in the space, and so there's we could talk more about that if that's interesting. The problem that I'm very focused on naming this year is the problem of complexity that arises from a reduction in friction. And this is a big topic, but I think that the short version is the modern data stack, like many technologies that have come before it, has made a certain thing much, much, much easier. And it turns out that when you have a complex system and you reduce the friction in a key part of it, well, there's going to be a lot more stuff that gets output by this process. And that's not in and of itself a bad thing, but it does create like a downstream problem to solve, which is the management of that, increased stuff. And the folks that I like couldn't fully wrap my head around this. Sometimes I'm too close to the world the way it is today that like TBT has helped to create, and I have a hard time seeing the forest for the trees. But I spoke to a couple of folks who have been through prior waves of this happening. One is Bob Muglia, who yes, he is critical at Snowflake, but also he was a senior person at Microsoft during the explosion of the PC era. And the PC era is like exactly this thing happening. And then I talked to some folks who were early at VMware, who had this exact same dynamic. They had a term for it. They called it VM sprawl. People would spin up VMs, run workloads on them, and then maybe that person would leave the company. No one would know what workload this VM was running. They'd be afraid to kill it. And so it was just like this VM that would just like live forever. And so in both of these instances, Microsoft and the Microsoft ecosystem, and then VMware had like helped to govern the new problem that had been created by this like huge technology unlock. But in the process of innovation, like it's never totally straight. Like it's a bumpy path, and you run into new problems, and then you solve them.
Interesting. Can you give me some examples of growing complexity due to
Yeah.
the modern data stack?
So when I was first using DBT to, implement the modern data stack across, Series A through C VC funded startups, a lot of models was, I don't know, 150, 250. I mean, I think my biggest client in the 2017, 2018 time period had 400 data models, DBT data transformations. And that felt like a lot. But the community has now been using DBT for much longer, and there are much larger organizations today using DBT than there were in the early days. And so a large DBT project is no longer, a dozen users and, 400 or 500 models. It is 500 or 1,000 committers and, 2 to 10,000 data models. And we have run into, I think the largest DBT project that I'm aware of has 39,000 data models today. So it's a lot. And that is not, that is not in and of itself a problem. That's like saying, oh, we write too much software code today. It's like nobody thinks that we write too much software code. Like we need to write as much code as is required to create the applications that we need to exist. The problem with scale is as you first experience this scale as a community, you have to say like, okay, how well is this working, and what parts of it are working and what parts aren't working. And then, like Python, we were talking about Python before. I'm not not deeply experienced in like developing Python at scale, but one of the things that the community went through was adding a type system to the language, and its roots as a language didn't really seem to need that. But then at a certain point, users were saying like, this is a big problem for me. I need to add this functionality. And with DBT, one of the problems around scaling is a recognition that you need to separate large DBT code bases into many discrete parts and allow individual teams to own their part of the code base. And this is in software engineering, you could call it service-oriented architecture, microservices, or two pizza teams, or whatever. But in software, we've been doing this for 2 decades or something like that. But again, in data, we have been less mature for long periods, and so DBT did not anticipate in its original design 10,000 models in a DBT project. And so we need the constructs to enable you to kind of decompose your big DBT code base into many different parts, and then allow those parts to kind of be reintegrated with one another using well-defined interfaces that are mature and reliable.
Interesting. So what would happen if you take, I'm a fan of taking the logical extremes of the situation. So if you had, say, 1 million DBT models in an organization, what would happen? Or say 2 million? Why not? Just keep scaling it up. I mean, at what point what starts breaking, right? And why?
Well, I can tell you exactly, the experience of at 10,000. I don't. My guess is that at 1 million, it probably looks like just a worse version of 10,000.
Sure.
But there's a couple of problems. One is very, very obvious and basic, but if you try to cram all 10,000 of those models into a single DBT project and use typical DBT constructs like DBT build, DBT docs, from a performance perspective, it just doesn't actually perform that well. There are certain decisions that have led to the core user experience that that people love that don't operate as well at that kind of scale. And so, and things like, DBT docs made some design decisions like, I'm just going to take the JSON object that DBT produces with all the catalog information in it. I'm just going to load it into browser memory, and it's going to be really snappy. And well, when that object gets big enough, that solution doesn't really scale. So these are the kind of like, first order concerns. But then the second order concerns are, I think, more interesting and more, they require like more deep engagement with the design problems in order to get them right. And the problem right now is you have two choices when you scale up your models. You can either keep things in the same project, or you can split them out into multiple projects. And when they're in the same project, you have problems like either, like we were just talking about, things take a long time, or because the surface area inside of this project gets bigger and bigger and bigger, you have many different people collaborating in there. It becomes very hard to get a good pull request review. Because nobody understands the full surface area of the code base. And so when you go and make changes, no one's really confident that these changes are really correct. It becomes very challenging to construct a clean DAG. So in software engineering, there's this concept of access levels. So public, private, protected. One of the core things of software engineering is defining what parts of your code other people should be reading and what parts are kind of abstracted away from them. They don't need to care about that.
Right.
DBT doesn't really have that, or up until very recently. We've been working on this for this year so far. Up until recently, DBT didn't have that concept. And so what happened when a lot of people were working together inside of a DBT DAG, people would just kind of like reference each other's stuff, and you would look at the DAG and it would end up looking like a bowl of spaghetti. And so what you need much clearer definitions of, hey, I'm the finance data team. I am going to define 10 outputs that anybody at the organization can read from, whether you're doing reporting on top of them or whether you're doing downstream data modeling. And those 10 outputs, I'm going to support them incredibly well. They're going to be stable, contracted. But then I'm going to have 100, 200, 1,000 models upstream from them that whatever goes on in there, that's my business. And that's not really my contract with you, external party. So we needed to give people the constructs to like create more mature architecture around, because otherwise, you got spaghetti code, you got like unreliable code because people didn't know how to like insist on quality around it. But if you separated things out into multiple DBT projects, the other version was that things were there was no way to get visibility into what other teams were doing. And so you ended up with duplicative work that drove up Snowflake costs and led to lower quality outputs. Different teams would calculate things differently, which is kind of the whole thing we were trying to solve in the first place, right. Is not doing that. So the answer is you need to be able to have both. You need to be able to shrink the area of concern for a given team, but then you need to allow that team to have clean ways to plug into the work of other teams.
Right. While also maintaining probably definitional integrity and everything else that matters at the end of the day with data. Because one of the big problems I could definitely see is and not just model sprawl, but terminology and vocabulary and definitional sprawl,
Yep,
which
yep,
is not great when you're doing analytics. So that's interesting.
100%. And you need to. Maybe this is the same thing that shows up in software engineering. I am not uh, well versed enough to know the answer to this, but what we found in data is that um, if you make it really easy to rely on shared functionality, people will do it. But if you make it hard, people will just not do it, and then they will end up, reinventing the wheel over here. It can be make it hard from a product experience perspective, or if you make it hard from an organizational perspective. If the data team here needs to access data from another team, but they have no real relationships with that team and don't have a lot of trust in the work that they output, then they're not going to do it, and the best product in the world can't make them do it.
But I think I don't know what you've seen, but I know through my experience, working consulting, that's exactly where a lot of this the crux is the organizational behavior piece. We were talking about that earlier, the power of
Yep.
organizational behavior, right? And I think kind of to your point where your professor was telling you, yeah, everyone wants to take the finance classes. I think in a lot of cases, as an industry, we want to whack everything over the head with technology. At
Yep.
the end of the day, the organizational problems are the ones that are typically going to sneak up on you. I mean, how much of that are you trying to factor into to solving this issue of complexity?
So I think we've done a pretty reasonable job over the years of making it clear that that technology is not the only solution to any of these problems. We wouldn't have a community if we didn't think that
Right.
people were a critical component of the solution. And we've tended to be reasonably opinionated about the way that this work should be done in the past. When the ETL to ELT paradigm shift happened, a lot of folks in the data transformation space wanted to keep a leg in both of those worlds, and we just said no, that's ELT is the way that this stuff is going to be done, and we're building a product for that world. And that's just one example. There's many places where we've been opinionated. But so I think that right now our product and engineering teams are very hard at work in making sure that the constructs exist inside of DBT so that we can organize ourselves in the right way. And that's data contracts and access levels and versions and cross-project refs and all of this stuff. But we need to, as this stuff continues to make its way out into the world, we have to also catalyze a conversation around how do you organize data teams? And I don't think there's one correct answer there, but I do think that there are probably some really important principles that if you don't follow those principles, you're going to have a hard time.
For sure. Yeah. One that comes to mind that I talk a lot about is Conway's Law, just sort of the gravity that exists in organizations and how you
ship your org chart.
Yep, exactly. Right. Yeah. When there's notions of team topologies talks about reverse Conway's Law, which is just, organize yourself according to the architecture that you want. Easier said than done, I would imagine, in a lot of companies, especially when you get to the scale where you have, what is it, 39,000 or whatever it was, the
sure.
models. At that point, it's go try it out. But no, I think it's a good way of putting it is organize, having the conversation around data teams and these discussions. I think this is a bit underrated. I wouldn't say a bit; it's vastly underrated. What I've noticed is the challenges with getting people to use the tools properly, even in the way you're opinionated is a knowledge and educational thing, right? And it's about also developing that culture of like, here's how you know, use this tool or whatnot. I mean, you can look at like, I don't know, Harley Davidson motorcycles is a really good example of like, I think a company that has a culture around their product, and it's just like, here's how you're supposed to dress when you're on a Harley, right? Like, you know, it's almost its own meme, but the thing is, it's kind of a self-reinforcing thing too, where people are like, it's like, you can tell you're part of our tribe, you can tell you're not. And I think DBT, more than a lot of other you know, communities out there, I think has done a good job at, you know, at least having built sort of a self-reinforcing culture around you know, what it's doing. Could it do more, you know, to reduce the sprawl? I mean,
so
probably.
I don't know if this is at all interesting or useful, but I think that we have been reasonably successful at doing that at the practitioner level. People who are in the code doing the work every day. And so when it comes to things that practitioners can set the agenda on, I think we've been pretty successful at driving that type of change. A lot of times the org structure stuff is controlled by a different set of people. And especially in large organizations, those people are multiple levels away from the practitioners that we have historically had a great relationship with. And so, you know, again, maybe this is not that interesting, but it's like inside baseball. But we are trying to develop the muscle around how do we build relationships with those folks, because we need them to join this party too, if we are really going to drive the next type of change that we want to see.
I think that's a fascinating topic that deserves its own podcast. But it's that last mile problem, right? I mean, because I think we're as a data data community, you know, DBT more broadly, I think we're good at speaking within our own echo chambers. What we're not good at is talking to the business. I wrote an article on my Substack about a month or two ago where it was like, I wish when we talk to the business, we just stop using the word data and just start talking about like, what are the problems that you want to solve? Speak their language. Because what I've known over the years, you know, is that if you're not a data person, you don't care about whatever the data person's selling you. You just want whatever they're doing to help you with your job and make you look awesome and stuff, right? But it's like if you approach it like, you know, I'm writing a model file for you, right? To a non-business user, just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Does that work in Excel, by the way? That's the other question. But I think the approach that we're trying to take is it could be better, right? So to me, this is the crux. This is like, we got 90% of the way there, and the last 10%, this is like the hard last 10%.
I think that so there's this like don't do anything as a company that, quote unquote, doesn't make the beer taste better. Like if it's not a core competence, then why would you do it versus why wouldn't you just outsource it? And I think that there was a real trend towards outsourcing software engineering in the early, maybe the entire 2000s for a lot of
shipping, offshoring,
and I was a consultant at Deloitte at the time, and I was on the other side of that equation, but increasingly companies of all sizes and digital natives and not are realizing that having software development competency internally is critical to their success. And they've had to invest themselves in the idea that having our own knowledge here will lead to better outcomes. And I still think that is less an idea that's less engaged with on the data side. I think that certainly not all, but many large organizations still are at a place that software development was in the 2000s. And there's a the mythical man month. How do you who are just going to hire a lot of people and throw them at the problem, and it's it's become very clear in software engineering that the way that you write code matters, and the way you organize yourselves. And this is just now like pretty common knowledge in the field. And I think it'll get there in data too, but it'll be a process.
It's a process. I think you're absolutely right. I think one of the other themes we've been talking about is just we're borrowing a lot from software engineering, right? I mean, that's one of the big macro themes in data really is that if you want to look at
a one-trick pony. Like every single problem, it's like, how is this showing up for the community that I'm a part of? And has this shown up for software engineers before? Because not every time, but many times it has, and there's been good solutions.
Yeah. I mean, they paved the way, right? I mean, and you mentioned, Mythical Man Month, right? I mean, the author also wrote No Silver Bullet, right? And talked about back then about how just every time we think we found the answer to software engineering, it's elusive. But the thing is that software's managed to make great strides. I mean, great software is being shipped all the time, and the results are there. I definitely agree that data will get there. It's, I mean, when I talked to Bill Inman, for example, right? I mean, he started writing code in 1960, I think. And
gosh,
right. I actually had a DBT event in Denver, and me and him were kind of just doing the Joe and Bill show. But he asked the crowd, like, who was born in 1960? Like nobody, right? And he's like, so I got some perspective here. And he went on to say, the data field is just very immature. I mean, accounting has been around for like thousands of years in some way, shape, or form. And other practices, medicine and whatnot, have been around for a long time. But data technology itself is relatively immature, and data is even more immature than that. So it's just to be expected, right? But so we can beat ourselves up. But I mean, the thing is, we can also
I think it's important to recognize the gains we made in the past decade, which have been like really, truly massive. Anybody who is not happy with the state of the world right now should go back in time 10 years and, recognize how incredibly disempowering it was to operate at that moment in time. But it is going to be a multi-decade long journey, and that's okay. We need to be self-critical, and we need to be pointing towards the future.
That's awesome. Well, cool. I think it's a good note to end the show on too. So it's I'm excited about the future. I get the sense that you are too. So this is it's up to people. What's up?
No, I'm very excited about the future. I think that there have been some kind of initial innovations that kicked off the modern data stack, and that we've seen a lot of kind of compounding effects that have gone on over the course of the past 10 years. The market size has gone way up. The level of sophistication of products has gone up. Vendors have really now had time to build products that work, and have, people in the industry have gotten an opportunity to try these products and engage with them. So like we're on an exponential growth curve as an industry, and I'm like very, very bullish on what the next few years look like there.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you're leading it too, right? So it's going to be interesting to be in the driver's seat to some extent on that too. So that's cool.
Thanks for a great conversation. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, likewise, Tristan. Yeah, we'll talk to you later.